My boat was moored beside an old bathing ghat of the river, almost in ruins. The sun had set. On the roof of the boat, the boatmen were at their evening prayer. Against the bright background of the western sky, their silent worship stood out like a picture. The waning light was reflected on the still surface of the river in every delicate shade of color, from gold to steel blue. A huge house with broken windows, tumble down verandas, and all the appearance of old age was in front of me. I sat alone on the steps of the ghat, which were cracked by the far-reaching roots of a banyan tree. A feeling of sadness began to come over me when suddenly I was startled to hear a voice asking,
Sir, where have you come from?
I looked up and saw a man who seemed half-starved and out of fortune. His face had a dilapidated look. His dirty coat of Assam silk was greasy and open at the front. He appeared to be just returning from his day's work, strolling by the side of the river at a time when he should have been resting at home. The newcomer sat beside me on the steps. I said in answer to his question, I come from Ranchi.
What occupation?
I am a merchant.
What sort?
A dealer in silk and timber.
What name?
After a moment's hesitation, I gave a made-up name. Still the stranger's curiosity was not satisfied. Again he questioned me.
What have you come here for?
For a change of air. My cross-examiner seemed a little astonished. He said,
Well, sir, I have been enjoying the air of this place for nearly 6 years. And with it, I have taken a daily average of 15 grains of quinine. But I have not noticed that I have benefited much.
Still, you must acknowledge that after Ranchi, I shall find the air of this place sufficient of a change.
Yes, indeed. More than you bargained for. But where will you stay here?
Pointing to the tumble-down house above the ghat, I said, There. I think my friend had a suspicion that I had come in search of hidden treasure. However, he did not pursue the subject. He started off describing to me what had happened in this ruined building some 15 years before. I found that he was the schoolmaster of the place. The boatmen, having finished their evening prayer, turned their attention to their cooking. As the last light of the day faded, the dark and empty house stood silent and ghostly above the deserted ghat. The schoolmaster said, Nearly 10 years ago, when I came to this place, Bhushan Saha
used to live in this house. He was the heir to his childless uncle, Durga Saha's property and business. But he was modern. He had been educated. And not only did he speak faultless English, but actually entered Sahib's offices with his shoes on. In addition to that, he grew a beard. You only had to look at him to see that he was a modernized Bengali. In his own home too, he had another drawback. He had a beautiful wife. With his college education on one hand, and on the other his beautiful wife, there was no chance of him preserving our good old traditions in his home. Sir, you are definitely a married man. So it is hardly necessary to tell you that the ordinary female is fond of sour green mangoes, hot chilies, and a stern husband. A man need not necessarily be ugly, poor, or even blind to be cheated of his wife's love. But he is sure to lose if he is too gentle. The wife of a man who by his own accord is submissive is altogether out of employment. All those weapons inherited from her grandmothers of untold centuries are useless in her hands. The force of her tears, the fire of her anger, and the snare of her glances lie idle. Under the spell of modern civilization, man has lost the God-given power of his barbaric nature, and this has loosened the conjugal ties. The unfortunate Bhushan, a product of the machine of modern civilization, an absolutely faultless man. He was therefore neither successful nor in his business, not even in his home. Moni, being his wife, used to get her caresses without asking, her silk muslin saris without tears, and her bangles without being able to pride herself on her victory. In this way, her woman's nature became atrophied, and with it, her love for her husband. She simply accepted things without having anything to give in return. Her harmless, foolish husband used to imagine that to give is the way to get. Little did he know how foolish it was. The result of this was that Moni looked upon her husband as a mere machine for turning out her muslin saris and her bangles. So perfect a machine that never for a single day that she need to oil its wheels. Bhushan's birthplace was Pulbure. He moved here just for business. At his Pulbure house, he had a good old joint family with uncles and aunts. He brought his wife to his house to keep her to himself alone. But there is this difference between a wife and one's other's possessions, that by keeping her to oneself, one may lose her beyond recovery. Bhushan's wife did not talk very much, nor did she mingle much with her neighbors. To feed a Brahmin in obedience to a sacred vow, or to give alms to a beggar, was not her way. Whatever she got, she saved up most carefully, with the one exception of the memory of her husband's caresses. She was unable to bear children. She didn't have anything to love in her life. She was very efficient in terms of work, not being anxious about anyone, never being distracted by love, always working and saving. She was never sick nor sorry.
Just as he was speaking, some jackals began to howl from a neighboring thicket. The schoolmaster stopped the torrent of his talk for a moment. When the sound had ceased, and the earth and the water relapsed into deeper silence, he opened his glowing eyes wide in the darkness of the night and resumed the thread of his story.
Suddenly, a tangle occurred in Bhushan's complicated business. Suffice it to say that, for some sudden reason, he found it difficult to get credit in the market. If only he could somehow raise a sum of 2 lakh rupees for a few days and rapidly flash it before the market, then his credit would be restored and he would be able to sail fair again. But the money did not come easily. If people in the market found out that he was borrowing money, his business would suffer even more. So he decided, with much hesitance, that it was best to mortgage his wife's jewelry and get out of trouble. He went to her, but was not able to face his wife as easily as most men are.
So now you need my jewelry?
It's just for a few days and I promised you I will get it back. It's just jewelry anyway.
How can you even say that? Don't you even feel a speck of shame?
But
Yes, I know what you're thinking. But you didn't do me any favor by giving me these. It's a husband's responsibility to fulfill his wife's wishes. It's not about the jewelry. It's about my self-respect. Jewelry is not just an ornament for a woman. It's her pride. As a husband, it's your duty to protect my pride, not to sell it. I will not be giving up any of my jewelry. You'll have to find some other way.
Bhushan, the modern husband, being too proud to touch his wife's jewels, went to Calcutta to try some other way to raise the sum. And Moni called her cousin Madhusudan for consultation. He was not only the man to profit himself by a dint of hard work, But by help of his position in the family, he got Bhushan to employ him and was thus able to save a salary. Mani called him to the house and told him what had happened. She ended up asking him,
Now, what is your advice?
I don't like the look of things at all. Babu will never be able to raise that much money. And I know that man. He will fall back upon your jewelry.
from what she knew of humanity, she thought this was not only possible, but very likely. Her anxiety became keener than ever. She had no child to love, and though she did have a husband, she was almost unable to realize his very existence. Her blood froze at the very thought that her only object of love, the wealth, which like a child had grown from year to year, was thrown into the bottomless abyss of trade.
What is to be done then?
You can't stay here. It's unsafe for you now. Why not take your jewels and go to your father's house?
You're right. Baba's place is the safest for me right now. Arrange a boat. We'll leave tonight.
It was a rainy night towards the end of summer. At this very ghat, a boat was moored. Mani, wrapped from the head to foot in a thick shawl, stepped into the boat. The frogs croaked in the thick darkness of the cloudy dawn. Madhusudan, waking up from sleep, roused himself from the boat and whispered,
Give me the box of jewels.
Not now. Let us first start.
The boat started moving swiftly down the current. Mani had spent the whole night in covering her every part of her body with her ornaments. She was afraid that if she put her jewels into a box, they might be snatched away from her hands. But if she wore them on her person, then no one could take them away without murdering her. It is true that Mani failed to understand Bhushan, but there was no doubt about her understanding of Madhusudan. Madhu had written a letter to his office to inform that he is taking his mistress to her father's house. The steward in the office was an old servant of Bhushan's father. He was furiously angry and wrote a lengthy epistle full of misspellings to his master. Although the letter was weak in its grammar, it was forcible in its language and clearly expressed the writer's disapproval of giving too much freedom to the womankind. Bhushan, on receiving it, understood the motive of Mani's secret departure. What hurt him most was the fact that, in spite of his respectful attitude towards his wife's unwillingness to part with her jewels in this time of his desperate need, his wife still suspected him. He bent his head and said to himself,
Well, if this is your judgment, then so be it. I will simply do my own duty.
He decided not to write a word on the subject on his wife, and determined in his mind that he would never mention it to her again. 10 days later, having secured the necessary loan, Bhushan returned to his home. He imagined that Mani, after completing her mission, had by this time come back from her father's house. And so, he approached the door of the inner apartments, wondering whether his wife would show any signs of shame or penitence for the undeserved suspicion with which she had treated him. He found that the door was shut. He broke the lock and entered the room, just to it being empty. At first, Bhushan did not worry about his wife's absence. He thought that if she wanted to come back, she would do so. His old Brahmin steward came to him and said,
What good will come of taking no notice of it? You ought to get some news of the mistress.
Acting on this suggestion, Bhushan sent messages to Mani's father's house. The messengers brought back the news that, up to that time, neither Mani nor Madhusudan had turned up there. When a search began in every direction, men went along both banks of the river, inquiring about the two. The police were given a description of Madhu, but all in vain. They were unable to find anything about their disappearance. Bhushan lost all hopes of finding his wife. It was the festival of Krishna's birth, and it had been raining incessantly from early morning. There was a fair going on in celebration of the festival. The sound of distant singing could be heard mingling with the sound of pouring rain. Bhushan was sitting alone in the darkness at the window. He took no notice of the damp wind, the spray of the rain, and the sound of the singing. In a cupboard with a glass door, there were all sorts of things arranged with evident care. Her china dolls of childhood days, scent bottles, a sumptuous pack of cards, large, brightly polished shells, and even empty soap boxes. In a niche, there was a favorite little lamp with its round globe. Moni had been in the habit of lighting it with her own hands every evening. One who goes away, leaving everything empty, leaves the imprint of their living heart even on lifeless objects.
Come, Mani. Come back again. Light your lamp. Fill this room with light again. See, all your things are here, waiting for you. No one will claim anything from you anymore. Come back. Come back and give your living unity to these scattered, lifeless things. Come back and give meaning to my life again. Come back.
In the dead of night, as the heavy rain had ceased and the noise from the fair had become silent, Bhushan was still sitting by the window, gazing at the impenetrable darkness which seemed to him as if the very gates of oblivion were before him, reaching to the sky, as if he had only to cry out to be able to recover the sight of his lost jewel, his money. Suddenly, a jingling sound of ornaments were heard. It seemed to be advancing up the steps of the gut. The river and the darkness of the night were indistinguishable. Thrilled with excitement, Bhushan tried to pierce and push through the darkness with his eager eyes, till they ached, but he could see nothing. The more anxious he was to see, the denser the darkness became, and the more shadowy became the outer world. Nature, seeing an intruder at the door of her hall of death, seemed suddenly to have drawn a still, thicker curtain of darkness. The sound reached the top step of the bathing gut and now began to come towards the house. It stopped in front of the door, which had been locked by the porter before he went to the fair. Then upon the closed door, there fell a rain of jingling blows, as if with some ornaments. Bhushan was not able to sit still another moment, making his way through the unlighted rooms and down the dark staircase. He stood before the closed door. It was padlocked from the outside. So he began to shake it with all his might. The force with which he shook the door and the sound which he made woke him up suddenly. He found he had been asleep, and in his sleep he had made his own way down to his house. His whole body was wet with sweat. His hands and feet were icy cold, and his heart was fluttering like a lamp just about to go out. He realized that there was no sound except the pattering of the rain, which had commenced again. Although the whole thing was a dream, Bhushan felt as if for some very small obstacle he had been cheated the wonderful realization of his impossible hope. The incessant patter of the rain seemed to say to him, this awakening is the dream and the world is vain. The festival continued on the following day, and the doorkeeper again had to leave. Bhushan gave orders that the door has to be left open all night, but the porter objected that it was unsafe as the village was filled with suspicious people from outside because of the fair. But Bhushan would not listen. He didn't even allow him to remain and stay guard when he offered that. The porter was puzzled but did not press the point. That night, having extinguished the light, Bhushan took his seat at the open window of his bedroom as before. The sky was dark with the rain clouds, and there was a silence as of something indefinite and impending. Just like the previous night, a clattering and jingling sound came from the gut. But this time, Bhushan did not look in that direction, lest by his over-anxiety and restlessness, his power of sight and hearing would become overwhelmed. He made a supreme effort to control himself and sat still. The sound of the ornaments gradually advanced from the gut and entered the open door. Then it slowly came winding up the spiral staircase which led to the inner apartments. It became impossible for Bhushan to control himself. His heart began to thump wildly and his throat was choking with suppressed excitement. Having reached the head of the spiral stairs, the sound came slowly along the veranda towards the door of the room, where it stopped just outside with a clunking sound. It was now only just on the other side of the threshold. Bhushan could contain himself no longer, and his pent-up excitement burst forth in one wild cry.
Money!
And he sprung up from his window chair, with lighting rapidly. Thus startled out of his sleep, he found that the window panes were rattling with the vibration of his cry, and outside he could hear the frogs croaking and the rain pouring down. Bhushan struck his forehead in despair. Next day, the fair broke up. The stall keepers went away. Bhushan gave orders that no one except him should sleep in the house that night. The servants came to the conclusion that their master was going to practice some mystic rites. All that day Bhushan fasted. In the evening, he took his seat at the window of the empty house. That day, the sky had glimpses of twinkling stars while being partly cloudy. The moon was late in rising, and as the fair was over, there was not a single boat on the flooded river. The villagers, tired out because of the fair, were sound asleep. Bhushan, sitting with his head resting on the back of his chair, was gazing up at the stars, thinking of the time when he was 19 years old and was studying in Calcutta. How he used to lie in the college square with his hands behind his head, gazing up at those eternal stars, dreaming open-eyed about money wasn't Bulbure. The separation from her was like an instrument whose tensed strings were stuck by the stars, playing the sweet song of his love. As he watched them, the stars one by one disappeared from the sky above. From the earth beneath, screens of darkness met the way tired eyelids meet weary eyes. Tonight, Bhushan's mind was full of peace. He felt certain that the moment had come when his heart's desire would be fulfilled and that death would reveal his mysteries to his devotee. The sound came from the river gut, just as the previous nights, and advanced up the steps. Bhushan closed his eyes and sat in deep meditation. The sound reached the empty hall. It came winding up the spiral stairs. Then it crossed the long veranda and paused for a long time, while at the bedroom door Bhushan's heart beat fast. His whole body trembled, but this time he did not open his eyes. The sound crossed the threshold. It entered the room, then went slowly round the room, stopping before the rack where the clothes were hanging, the niche with its little lamp, the table where dried betel leaves were lying, the almirah with its various knickknacks, and last of all, it came and stood close to Bhushan himself. Bhushan opened his eyes. By the faint light of the crescent moon, he saw a skeleton standing right in front of his chair. It had rings on all its head. In fact, its whole body glittered and sparkled with gold and diamond. The ornaments hung loosely on the limbs, but did not fall off. Most dreadful of all was the fact that the two eyes which shone out from the bony face were living. Two dark, moist eyeballs looking out with a fixed and steady gaze from between his thick, long eyelashes. As he looked, his blood froze in his veins. He tried hard to close his eyes, but could not. They remained open like those of a dead man. Then the skeleton, fixing its gaze upon the motionless Bhushan, silently beckoned up with an outstretched hand. The diamond rings on its bony fingers glittering in the pale moonlight. Bhushan stood up as if he had lost all his senses and followed the skeleton, which left the room, its bones and ornaments rattling out with a hollow sound. The skeleton crossed the veranda and, winding down the pitch-dark spiral staircase, reached the bottom of the stairs. Crossing the lower veranda, they entered the empty, lampless hall and, passing through it, came out on the brick-paved garden path. The bricks crunched under the tread of the bony feet. Faint moonlight struggled through the thick network of branches, and the path was difficult to discern, making their way through the flitting fireflies which haunted the dark, shadowy path. They reached the river gut by those very steps up which the sound had come. The bejeweled skeleton went down step by step, the stiff gait and hard sound. On the swift current of the river, flooded by the heavy rain, a faint streak of moonlight was visible. The skeleton descended to the river, and Bhushan, following it, placed one foot in the water. The moment he touched the water, he woke with a start. His guide was no longer to be seen. Only the trees on the opposite bank of the river were standing still and silent. And overhead the half moon was staring as if astonished. Bhushan slipped and fell headlong into the river. Although he knew how to swim, he was powerless to do so, for his limbs were not in his control. From the midst of dreams, he had stepped for a moment only into the borderland of waking life. The next moment to be plunged into eternal sleep. So, do you believe this story?
Do you?
No. And I can give you one or two reasons why. In the first place, Dame Nature does not write novels. She has enough to do without.
And in the second place, my name happens to be Bhushan Shah.